Thank you so much, Julie. Thank you, My Jewish Learning. Thank you, Dani. Thank you, everyone, for making this possible. Greetings from 8 a.m. Los Angeles, where I just sent my kids quickly out the door with my husband off to school so that we could start this. It was surreal to hear Julie a few seconds ago describe me as a tour guide, for Iran, because ironically, I wouldn't be allowed back there today, nor would I really be allowed back there, nor would I be, insane enough, as I should say, to even try to go back. But as you will hear my story and the history of hundreds of thousands of other Iranian Jews, you'll see why that makes perfect sense, of course. I will just start out by saying, that I think Jewish communities around the world have a particular fascination with Iranian Jews because we represent an anomaly. Throughout Jewish history, the way that history of the Jews of the Middle East particularly is taught is that there not only was a lot of persecution against us, but it remains. The way that, particularly in the Jewish community, the history of, I think, European and Ashkenazi Jewry is taught based on the facts of the ground is primarily through a 20th century Holocaust lens. So we see the horrid persecution and devastation of the 1930s and 40s. And then we sort of get these messages and themes that things turned out okay now, right? That putting the hideous, anti-Zionism aside and certain acts of anti-Semitism on the European continent, that we generally think, okay, if I wanted, to look at Jewish communities in Europe, for example, right now, they would be all right. But yet the Jews of the Middle East remain this anomaly because the area itself is still so hostile to the Jewish state, to Israel, and to some of its Jewish members, and because so much of that population has been liquidated, has escaped, right? About 850,000, we believe, Jews from the Middle East and North Africa have escaped since the 1940s and 1950s. So when you hear this concept of an Iranian Jew, we rightly assume this person to be sort of like a, an anomaly, right? Which is based on everything that we hear about Iran in the news today. How could it be that the world's largest Shiite state, right, up to about 100 million people, that the world's premier state sponsor of terrorism, that Israel's sworn enemy, had an unbelievably rich and really organic Jewish community for almost 3,000 years, for 2,700 years, right? When people meet me as an Iranian Jew, there's really this fascination of, I was able to coexist in a land and in an area and in a country where anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism is still so deeply steeped, right? It's sort of rare to find a first-generation Iraqi Jew at this point. You won't find them. I don't think there are Jews any left in Iraq. There was two, and then there was one who was guarding the main, synagogue. I don't know if he's still alive. So it's sort of rare to find an Iraqi Jew who you can talk to and say, my God, you lived there in the 80s and in the 90s and so on, and how was that? If you find, sort of the same for, let's say, Syrian Jews, right? Many of whom also left in the 1950s and especially in the 1960s after the Six-Day War. To some degree, Lebanese Jews. I mean, if I go to New York right now, the chances of me running into a Syrian Jew who was there in the 1990s and can really tell me firsthand accounts of what it was like to live under that regime is a little bit rare. But when you come to Los Angeles, or as we call it, Tehran-Angeles, which has about 80,000 Iranian Jews, half of them born in Iran, mind you. Some of them, like my parents, born before the revolution, others in my generation born after the revolution. And as we go on to the presentation, I'll tell you why that makes all the difference in the world, because we effectively, my parents and I, had two different countries that we grew up in. I really encourage you, if you have friends who are Iranian Jews, even, you know, even if they were born here, reach out to them, reach out to their parents, find out their stories, because we really are actually living testaments to a history that is still ongoing, right? So with that, I'm gonna have Dani start the presentation for me. And what I really call this is the Iranian Jewish experience. I'm not here to tell you only about history. It really encompasses, to me, an experience. And part of that experience is the very famous, you know, line that says, "My heart is in the East and I am in the West." And we often think of this, we really always think of this as "my heart is in the East" as Jerusalem and Zion. But for many Iranian Jews, the East is actually their homeland of 2,700 years, Iran, formerly known as Persia. But the bodies itself, like those of me and hundreds of thousands of others, are in places like Los Angeles, Great Neck, Atlanta, Baltimore, Toronto. There's some a few in Italy, some in Germany, and so on. So let's go on to the, oh, actually, I want to tell you what this is. So this is not me, this, or anyone I know. This picture was taken in 1964, I believe. This is during the time of the Shah, before the 1979 revolution that turned Iran into a fanatic Islamic theocracy. And this is a brother and sister. Their parents dressed them up for Purim. One is Iran and one is Israel. And I want you to know, I really put this picture front and center because the revolution only happened 42 years ago, right? 43 years ago in 1979. And somehow we think that Iran and Israel were always these bitter enemies as far as Iran is concerned anyways. And we really forget that people like these, you know, fanatic clerics that we know run Iran weren't always in power. There was a secular, highly secular king in power. That Israel and Iran were actually once had friendlier relations. And I just want you to imagine today, really today, if a Persian mother dressed up her son and daughter as Israel and Iran for Purim, it would be on the level of, look at these two little bitter enemy siblings, right? But back when this was done in 1964, you can actually see that it was done truly in a way to highlight a family and a friendship. So next slide. So I give a lot of presentations to middle schoolers and high schoolers, and I always bring this presentation up first because I think geography is the most important factor when you're addressing any issue related to the Middle East. And I will tell you here, right on the record, I always pull up the second, you know, generation Iranian Jewish kids who were born here, and I ask them to identify Iran on the screen for me. Many of them can't. Many of them can't. And this is a testament to the fact that we are a resettled refugee community in the West that really for the last 40 years has only been focused on moving forward. But we're also doing a disservice to our next generations, because as much as we have our wonderful cultural practices, and if you've been to a Persian wedding, you know how wonderful they are, or a Persian Passover Seder. But on the other hand, we're not passing down those facts and those legacies and stories. So I really bring this up for you as well, to say that you take a second and you ask yourself, do you know where Iran is on this map? And if you do, and if you can identify that it's the big giant one right in the middle, can you identify the geography of it to know its surrounding neighbors, right? Because Iran is the same in this sort of in the same situation as in Israel. If Israel was, you know, somewhere on the North American continent, we would all, you know, I would have had a lot less stressful work when I was doing public diplomacy at the Israeli consulate here in LA. And you see, you know, the neighbors, there's Afghanistan, Iraq, Turkey, Armenia, the Persian Gulf, certainly, and a hop, skip, and a jump from the Saudi Arabia and the Gulf countries who are so deeply threatened by it. Let's go on to the next slide, just so we can see, you know, what I was referring. So anyone who also is a Zionist, as I am, unabashedly, very proudly, can see again that Iran really is close enough to Israel that you know, that there's of course, a lot of cause for concern. You can see that it also shares a border with Pakistan, right? You see right in there in that Persian Gulf, you can understand why I believe one of the next wars in the Middle East will be fought over the Persian Gulf. Next slide. Okay, so where did Persian Jews come from? I will tell you that when I speak with American audiences, this is the #1 question that I get, because understandably, unless you live in certain parts of West Los Angeles in particular, or Great Neck, the concept of an Iranian Jew can sort of seem like a contradiction, right? The country, as I mentioned, is 99% Shiite Muslim. The 1% is a combination of Jewish, Zoroastrian, Baha'i, Christian, and so on. So the history of Iranian Jewry is actually amazing, and dare I say, a little bit more simple than people think. When it was the kingdom of Judea, the Neo-Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar conquers the temple, right, in 589 BCE, and he takes Israelites captive. In 539, Cyrus the Great, who really truly is a beloved figure among Iranian Jews, we've written extensively about him. This is all pre-Islam. In 539, Cyrus the Great conquers the Babylonians. And something amazing happens according to this lore, which is that the all-powerful, incredible King Cyrus the Great has a dream or some kind of vision, it is said, and in that, God or his angels come to him and implore him to release the Jewish or Israelite captives that he sort of inherited now from having conquered the Babylonian Empire, and to release them and liberate them back for only one reason: to go back to Jerusalem to rebuild the Second Temple. The picture that I have here of this wonderful cylinder that someone is holding is the famous Cyrus cylinder, which I think is one of the top 5 most important historical artifacts in history, enunciating really what we know now as the sort of the first declaration of universal human rights, right? There is no mention of Jews specifically on it, but there is mention that King Cyrus did liberate some of his subjects. Now, my family and the tens and thousands of others of the Israelite Jews, as we'll call them back then, found the climate to be very similar to where they were back in the Kingdom of Judea, in the Persian empires, on the plateaus. You know, there were peacocks and pomegranates and everything you will, so they stayed, and that is where they stayed. So you take a look and you think, okay, in the 6th century, you have the first really one of the oldest, if not the oldest, minority community of then ancient Persia. Fast forward that community almost 3,000 years to 1979, and you'll understand really the history of Iranian Jewry. I have many Ashkenazi friends, dearly beloved friends, and I love to ask them, where are your grandparents or great-grandparents from? And the answer is always the same. You know, oh, my grandmother was from Lithuania, my grandfather was from the former Czechoslovakia, and another grandfather was from Poland, and then the second one was also from former Czechoslovakia. If you ask most Iranian Jews, tell me about your ancestry, and they do 23andMe and the DNA and everything, it'll show up almost as 99% that their descendants were either Persian Jews or Iraqi Jews, or somehow even dating back, before that. And really, that's it, right? In fact, among my community, we have intermarriage too, but not the kind that American Jews who were born and raised in America or Ashkenazi Jews, some of them have. Intermarriage for Iranian Jews is when someone like me, an elitist from the capital city of Tehran, marries someone from Shiraz, 600 miles south, as I did with my husband. That, for us, is considered an intermarriage. So,
Tabby, real quick, we're curious, where is the artifact today, on the picture on the left?
Thank you very much for asking. So first of all, I saw that I was able to see it with my own eyes. It was brought to the Getty Center in LA a few years ago. I believe it's actually held in the British Museum, and that's something that the Iranian public will never actually forgive the government for. There's a very interesting history of how it was either brought out or supposed to be borrowed. I don't know about the terms exactly, but it's not in Iran. Let's put it that way. And it's fitting that it's not in Iran, because this incredible declaration of human rights cannot be home in a regime that is currently the #1 state sponsor of terror, right? Okay, let's go over to the next slide. So something that I really take pride in, I actually use it as a source of resilience, both for me and my children, is that the history of Iranian Jewry is so rich and vibrant that you are looking right now at the tombs of Esther and Mordechai from the Purim Megillah in the city of, is it Hamadan, I think, or is it Esfahan? Hold on, let me check for you on that. I always knew this. And thousands of Persian Jews every year make a pilgrimage to this shrine, and right on Purim. So can you imagine, whereas you and I maybe go to a synagogue and, you know, have the candy and the hot dogs and so on and the hamantashen, that still to this day, the 5,000 to 8,000 Jews that are left in Iran from a population of over 100,000 before 1979, some of them will make pilgrimages to Hamadan. I did find out it's actually the city of Hamadan, and they sit on, you know, they sit around and they actually listen to the Megillah in the tombs. We also have, so Iran, or the Persian Empire, is the only place outside of Israel that is home to Jewish prophets, and so we have Esther and Mordechai's tomb here in Hamadan. I really pray that once there's peace in Iran and there's a regime change, that if you can, you visit the country and you visit this center as well. The other prophet who, the prophet who's buried here is Daniel, the prophet Daniel. He's buried in Susa. So again, you have so much Jewish history in Iran. Can you go on to the next slides? Because I want to take everyone, we're going into a tour of the tombs of Esther and Mordechai. So here they are, and they're taken care of by some local Jewish community, but by local Jewish community members. But again, the community is aging, right? And we've seen examples of what happens, for example, in Iraq. People take care of the synagogue, take care of it until there's so much, you know, distress and, you know, conflict and turmoil that the community leaves en masse, and then you have just a few elderly people left to look after, like, for example, you know, Iraq's last synagogue, let's say, right? Libya's last, you know, last really functioning synagogue. So we're really hoping that we can have continued Jewish, you know, community members who can continue to take care of wonderful Jewish sites like the shrine, of the cemeteries that we have all over the country, and so on. Unfortunately, there have been some attacks against these tombs. Every few years there's something. There have been fires, there have been attacks for them, sometimes similar to what we see about Palestinian attacks. For example, we just recently had one against, you know, the tomb of Joseph. So it will be, you know, the fanatic, you know, average citizen, or sometimes with the backing of the government, sometimes not, just causing a few problems every now and then. Next slide. Okay, so we don't really have pictures, of course, dating, you know, back to anything but the maybe the late 19th century. What essentially happened was that you had a Jewish community, you had the presence there from about 589 BC, when we came in as Babylonian captives. Cyrus the Great comes in at 539 BCE. And then you have this continuous presence. And then I believe it was in about the 15 or 1600s, you have some very anti-Semitic practices starting to happen, which is based on a particularly Shiite, not Sunni Islam, but Shiite interpretation of what they call nejasat. Nejasat means ritual impurity. The short version of it meaning a person would be najes, like Najes. Under this doctrine, if a Shiite Muslim would bump into a Jew on the street, he or she would be contaminated. If a Jew was picking out fruit at a bazaar and put his hand on a few cucumbers, felt that they weren't ripe, and then moved on to the other cucumbers, the cucumbers would be contaminated and he would be forced to buy them, right? So when I tell you that this wasn't a few people, this was actually so widespread among the populace that a few years ago, a dear friend of mine sat down at a lecture, just an Iranian speaker, not Jewish, not nothing denominational, and she was sitting next to a very old Iranian woman, the Shiite Muslim woman, and the woman found out that my friend was Jewish and actually got up and moved away from her. I'm not saying that the entire population of Iran, of course, believes this today, but I want you to understand how ingrained the concept of nejasat is, to the point where my dad in the mid-1970s was studying in Massachusetts. This is all during the Shah, before the revolution, when America and Iran had relations, and he was paired up with an Iranian roommate. So my dad is the Jew, the roommate is Muslim, and my dad came to just, give him a gentle whack on the back and say, "Hey, brother, how are you doing?" And the guy immediately went and took a shower. So my dad asked himself, could this possibly be, this guy is getting a PhD in physics. Could it be that he actually thinks I'm still najas and ritually impure, as some of the populace had for hundreds and hundreds of years? So he slapped him on the back again and said, "Hey, buddy, let's go to class." Guess what happened? Another shower. There were actually a total of 3 showers that day, and this was happening in the mid-1970s in America, right? So what do you do? What do you do with a population that you believe is actually ritually impure? You truly believe that you will be contaminated if you come into contact with them. There's only one thing to do. You segregate them into their own ghettos or areas or quarters. For hundreds of years, the Jews of Persia and then Iran, the country became Iran in 1935, we'll get into that later, the official name change, had their own ghettos all over, not just in Tehran where I'm from, but all over, from north to south and east to west. This is one of the Jewish ghettos that you see. This picture was taken over 100 years ago. And what I really want to draw your attention to, if I'm taking you back right now to early 20th century Persia, we're going to call it then, is the fact that these people look pretty darn Middle Eastern, right? You've got the fez atop the head, you've got the camels, you've got these fantastic mustaches, darker skin. This is an important picture for several reasons. And right now in really the current political climate, this is a very important picture to remind any anti-Semite who wants to make a case against Jews that we are a privileged white population, that in fact, no. I don't actually believe any Jews are white, period. That's the only thing I actually have in common with white supremacists, is I never believed the Jews are white. If we were, white supremacists wouldn't have declared us their enemy to this day, right? I don't believe Ashkenazi Jews are white either, but that's a whole separate topic. But really, half the Jewish world was and is Mizrahim and Sephardim, as we call us, right? And they look like this. And for my particular community in Los Angeles, you have to understand, we have some stereotypes as being on the wealthier side, more opulent. The weddings are costing, $1 million and so on. Those are all stereotypes. And I am partly, proof of that. Because we lost everything after we escaped from Iran, but that's okay. America was our reward in every single way. So it's very important for me to show this picture to my own community, and not in a sort of a condescending way, but really in a truthful way to say, look, we do have certain associations today with sometimes with more opulence, but look at where we all came from, right? So let's go on to the next slide. again, these are just some of my favorite pictures and things that you know, most people have never seen. This is a Jewish ghetto of Iran on the left over here in the 20th century. This is what it looks like today. So really imagine walking through this small, it really just looks like an alley to me, right? And all of the hustle and bustle and everything that was going on there, and people bringing their, you know, 10 children along with them. And you know, the slaughterhouses right behind where they would shecht the cows and the chickens and goats and so on and distribute them. And it's not that, you know, one family would go and buy some steak. It's that the way that it worked for us, in particularly, I don't know if it was the same for European Jewish communities, but for us in the Middle East, it was, in some communities it still is, that one family would buy, you know, a portion of a cow and then split that with 3 or 4 other families, you know, whether they were relatives or not, or neighbors. Everything was fantastically communal, which was good in a way that you never really felt alone. You knew who you were, you know what you belonged to. But it also obviously stifled us tremendously, because we were it's supposed to be in the Jewish quarters and the ghettos from birth to death. We, by the Muslim governing authorities, there were laws about this. There were nejasat laws, meaning ritual impurity laws against us. We were not allowed to walk outside in the rain or the snow. Why? Why? Because if a Jew walked out, and I'm talking here even by the end of the you know, 1800s, you know, if a Jew walked out in the rain or snow, the contamination would be lifted off of, you know, taken off of his or her skin, and literally it would be an emergency situation in the city, because it would contaminate the waterways themselves. It would contaminate everything, right? So when particularly in the snow, when it rained, Jews were ordered to stay home. We were not allowed to build our homes, the doorways of our homes, over a certain length. We certainly were not allowed to build the doorways of the homes taller than those of Muslim homes. We were actually supposed to, we had to build them shorter, really unrealistically short, as a form of embarrassment, so that we could crouch down whenever we entered our homes, right? So these were some of the nejasat laws that were in place. You see again here, right? What you see here, by the way, is a population, you see in the left picture, that was almost strictly educated in Jewish studies. And I'm gonna get back to that later, and what the advent of secular studies to my community about 100 years ago meant for us today. But keep that in mind, that you're looking at a pious community, a Jewishly pious community, that predominantly had only access to Jewish education. Next. Okay, I love this picture. This is one of the Zionist federations that we had. Again, you're talking, you know, I think this picture was taken in 1918, and you really look at it and you think, okay, that's all the proof that I needed of vibrant Jewish communities in the Middle East. A group of men, fantastically Middle Eastern looking. I love the mustaches, again, the fezzes atop the head, the Persian rugs and tapestries behind them, with a giant Sefer Torah and the Magen David behind it, right? And they're called, this is called the Zionist Federation. That is the way that it translates from Persian to English. And this picture was taken again over 100 years ago. Next slide.
Just a quick question for me, Tabby. The word ghetto is from Italy. It wasn't called ghetto, of course. I'm imagining it was like another word.
No, it was in Persian. It was called mahalle, which means the sort of the quarters, or that a specific area that is contained, right? Here is Zionist Federation circa 1920s of Hamadan. These guys really want to show off to you. That's why they are being photographed in front of their incredible Persian rugs, right? Now, I can guarantee you that for all of these men here, the Sidurim, the prayer books that they used when they were in synagogue, were either completely in Hebrew, which is the fact that they knew Hebrew, so fluently, or as I grew up, Hebrew on one side and Persian on the other. And you see here in the Star of David in the wonderful Magen David behind them, you see the word Sion, right? Zion. And this picture was taken in the 1920s. Let's say it was taken in 1920. So it's taken 28 years before the establishment of the modern state of Israel in May 1948, which again is ultimate proof that for thousands of years, as I said right in the beginning of the introduction, that my heart is in the East, right? If my heart was in the East, it could have been in Persia and Iran, yes, but it was especially also in Jerusalem and in Zion. Something that I really do have to say that I love about my community of Persian Jews is more often than not, we are incredibly, unabashedly, beautifully Zionist. Part of it is because we've lived in a country like Iran. We've seen the other side of it. We were denied it. We were desperately, cruelly denied it, right? Next slide.
Is this it, Tabby? Okay, just making sure.
So I'll try to get through this fast. Here you see, I think this is from the 1930s, Purim party, right? That was held in one of the Jewish communities. These are just really fun pictures to see, but I want you to know that, I mean, look, these guys are standing over there with, I don't even know if these are real swords. They actually might be, right? And you've got, again, obviously in the front, the kids dressed up as one is King Achashverosh, one is Queen Esther, one is Mordechai, the one next to him, I think in the silly hat is Haman, right? Right up there in the front. This is their heritage. You're a Persian Jewish kid, Purim is your heritage. Mordechai and Esther are your aunt and uncle, right? So this is this part of this wonderful heritage that we really own, or that we should own. Next. Let's fast forward this. Okay, so now you're coming up into the late 1940s, early 1950s. Iran, even Persia, but again, the name of the country changed in 1935 because the Persian ambassador in Berlin took a look around him and saw how Nazism was taking over, sent memos back to Tehran and said, look, I really think these Nazis are the wave of the future. In the future world order, we might want to consider allying more with them because there's nothing that's going to stop these guys. Now, Iran itself, the term was not made up. The term Iran is ancient. It is actually really thousands of years old, right? There's a reason why my grandmother, rest her soul, was born in, the 1920s, and her name was Iran. So it was part of our vernacular, but the name of the empire and then the country was always Persia until 1935. It was officially changed to Iran. I'm talking new stationery was ordered, and this proved appeasing to the Nazis. Why? Because Iran sounds a lot like Aryan, right? Even that was not really truly not enough for me to ever be able to say that Iran in general, or the people, somehow were working side by side by the Nazis. Who really was suffering in the Middle East, which Jews were suffering, actively being killed and raped as a result of the Nazis in the Middle East, were particularly Iraqi Jews. I bring that to your attention today. Today, June 1st, marks the 81st anniversary of what the Iraqi Jewish community knows as the Farhud, F-A-R-H-U-D. It occurred on June 1st, 1941, during the holiday of Shavuot, which, as we know, is coming up this weekend. The Nazis had been in Baghdad for years. Nazi radio propaganda out of Berlin was being broadcast en masse into the Iraqi population. They were listening to it frequently. And so on June 1st, 1941, you had a series of very deadly, truly hideous pogroms against the Jewish populations of Iraq, particularly in Baghdad. The smallest estimates are that 200 people were killed, hundreds of women were raped, children were killed, businesses were looted, set on fire, homes were set on fire. The largest estimates were that over 1,000 Jews were butchered. One testament I was reading this morning before I started this presentation was that about 100 Jews were actually poisoned on purpose during the Farhud, during their hospital stay, and the doctor who did that got 5 years. He wasn't allowed to practice for 5 years. Okay, and that was his punishment. And so today we're actually marking that. The reason I bring that up is because the picture you're looking at is not of Iranian Jews, but of our brethren right next door with whom we share a border, Iraqi Jews. Once Israel is established in 1948, a lot of Iranian Jews flock to the nascent Jewish state, but they don't flock for the same reason as their Iraqi brethren did. Tens of thousands of Iraqi Jews escape. They don't just, get to go. They actually have to be escaped with unbelievable daring missions involving Mossad operatives and multiple, clandestine planes going back and forth from Baghdad to Israel. So Iranian Jews really leave because, again, they have Zion in their hearts, as the Iraqi Jews do, but not because there's active persecution. Iraqi Jews leave because they were actually being butchered, right, 10 years earlier. So you see all of these Iraqi Jews in a plane, and again, I want you to look at this picture, and I dare you to tell me that Jewish history is, teething with white privileged Jews, right? You see the mother holding her child in the blanket, right? You see, people are literally sitting on top of each other in here. And the people that you see in this video are the grandparents of Iraqi Jews in Israel today, right? The ones who are in high tech and models and actresses and, businessmen. And yes, the ones who even run the sabich and, falafel counters at Tel Aviv and, the other places. These are their grandparents. These are their ancestors. So it's very important to stop in the mid 20th century and make that distinction that for every Jewish community in the world, after Israel is established in 1948, the history is never the same. For my community of the Persian Jews, that was our first wave out of Iran. But still, there was about 100,000 of us in the country on the eve of the revolution, making it one of the largest, if not the largest Jewish population to still be around even in the 1980s in the Middle East, outside of Israel. Next slide.
So, Tabby, I just wanted to give you a quick time check. We have about 8 to 10 minutes, and then we'll have 10 minutes for questions. So just to give you a heads up.
So thank you. So let's keep going forward. I know I'm keeping that in mind too. This is a picture of my family. You are looking at my great-grandmother, Leah, the one in the little, headscarf. It's not because she there was a mandatory hijab headscarf rule in place. That came in my generation in the 1980s. It was because she was a pious and devout woman. And the little girl with her is my mother. And that is a picture that my uncle, this wonderful artist, drew of none other than Theodore Herzl. If you want me to ruin your morning, I'll tell you that nearly every teenager to whom I show this photo can't identify the person in the picture. Next. I'm also sorry if you're hearing any sounds in the background. We have a little bit of construction next to us. So David Ben-Gurion recognizes Iran's potential with what he calls the power of the periphery, right? And this is at the time when Pan-Arabism is really beginning. And then as we saw later on, of course, in the 60s and 70s, where you have Egypt's Nasser full out declaring war against Israel. You have the 1948, War of Independence, where 5 Arab countries attack Israel. Next. Okay, so those of a certain generation will certainly recognize these individuals. This was the Shah of Iran, whose father, Reza Shah, ruled the country from 1925 to 1941. His son came on board from 1941. He was the last secular leader that millions of Iranians had, and he was ousted in January 1979 when he fled the country. And about a month even 2 weeks later, you know, Ayatollah Khomeini enters the country and turns our entire world upside down. I actually want you to imagine that this is akin to someone coming with his movement and the backing of a heavy weaponry into America, God forbid, and turning it into an official, let's say even, you know, fundamentalist or evangelical Christian theocracy, right? They changed our flag, they changed our national anthem. They literally put in the words about, you know, Allah right in the flag. You can imagine that this made the 100,000 Jews or so who were there, including my parents at the time, just a little bit uneasy, especially when one of the first things that the new revolutionary regime did was to officially declare Zionism punishable by death. Zionism punishable by death. If you're out there waving an Israeli flag, it can be punishable by death, right? Next slide. So again, Persian Jews are interesting. I actually have a different reality than even my parents. Most Jews have a different reality than their grandparents, if their grandparents, you know, weren't born in America. I don't even have the same reality as my parents. These are my parents, you know, in the 1970s. You see my mother over there. She's the one with the bangs. She's wearing a t-shirt that says, life is a good thing. Little did she know that 1 year after this picture was taken, life would not be a very good thing, because the Ayatollah Khomeini would come in after 15 years of exile. The Shah had put him in exile, and completely turn over the country and turn it into an official Shiite theocracy with no separation between mosque and state. Here's a picture of my dad and his fantastic aviators and you know, hair from the 1970s. Again, all of this is outlawed today. Today in Iran, there are laws against men wearing sideburns. Barbers who cut men's hair in a Western style are cited, right? They're giving tickets, they're given citations. Last I checked in, maybe it was 2015, Iran actually came out with a law that men were not allowed to do anything to their eyebrows to make them seem either like two eyebrows or well groomed. This is all Western in the eyes of the regime, and the West is, as they've called America for years, the great Satan. Israel was reserved as the little Satan. So again, my father couldn't even really walk out in the streets and look like this today. My mother certainly could never walk out. Are you kidding? With a t-shirt and her hair uncovered today? No. Next slide. I'm sorry, by the way, that I can't move the slides myself. It was a technical issue. So this is the day the day really our lives forever changed. I wasn't even born. February 1st, 1979. Ayatollah Khomeini is escorted, not brought in by a coup, not brought in through, you know, violent overthrow of the Shah, very gently escorted, right, with his minions down into the tarmac at Tehran airport, where 5 million Iranians are waiting for him in the city. And this is what I always tell, especially teens, college students, many of whom have never heard of Ayatollah Khomeini. I actually tell them that he was so important and so prominent that he actually made Time Magazine's Man of the Year, right? Next slide, please. Okay, this is an important picture. So the first foreign dignitary, though I wouldn't use that term for a terrorist, the first foreign dignitary to visit the post-revolutionary regime certainly is not, you know, Iraq's Saddam Hussein next door. He was actually our sworn enemy and waged war with us for 8 years during the Iran-Iraq war. It wasn't, you know, Gaddafi. It wasn't, you know, Assad. The first foreign dignitary, if you can use that term, to visit the new regime in 1979 is, as you see here, Yasser Arafat, lovingly whispering words of nothing into the ears of our tyrant, you know, not our, but the tyrant Khomeini. We used to have a former de facto Israeli embassy right in Tehran. Of course, it was raided, but not before the diplomats got as much of their paperwork out of there. There were hundreds of Israeli architects in Iran on the eve of the revolution. They were actually building shipyards for us. If I told you how many skyscrapers and buildings in Tehran are from Israeli engineers, I mean, the number is just amazing. All of them, of course, fled on the eve of the revolution because they knew. Next. Okay. I'm going to take a 32-second pause to just close the door because I can hear noise from here. Thank you. I'm sorry, everyone. That was unorthodox, but I want you to be able to actually hear me. So this is a person who's very near and dear to my heart, really a wonderful person all around. This is me. And this was one of the pictures taken for, that we took for me for one of my passport photos so I could escape Iran, which thank God we did. I put a date on this picture for a reason. Most audiences can't believe that this picture was taken in 1988 when Michael Jackson and Madonna were at the top of the charts and hundreds of thousands of Jews were suffering across the world in post-revolutionary Iran, right? I think the fact that it's black and white also helps date it. And so a lot of people who see this picture think, was that in the 1930s? And I tell them, no, that was actually 1 month taken before 1989, right? And so again, as Western audiences, we were, those of us who were around back then, not me, I was still in Iran, but, I have friends, they were leading their own lives in the 1980s, 1990s, right? And it's so important to know that halfway across the world, you had Jewish communities who were, for example, as I was, and tens of thousands of other little Iranian Jewish girls, forced to comply with the mandatory hijab, with compulsory hijab, right? Meaning whether you were Jewish, non-Jewish, Baha'i, from around the age of 5 and upwards, I had to cover my hair when I left the home and wear the mandatory manteau, a very big, heavy jacket that had to cover my rear end. That's where it really had to cover, up to my rear end, right? I learned how to tie a headscarf before I learned how to tie my shoes. Next slide. Okay, again, this is the Iran my mother remembers. Wasn't she a knockout? So this was taken about 2 years, I think, before the revolution. Oh, 1 year before the revolution. Next slide. Okay. So, Danny, go back just very quickly to the slide before that, because I really, again, we're talking about women's rights, but somehow forgetting about women's rights in the Middle East often. Go to the next one, please, which is the picture of my mother. So you take a woman like this, and by force, you turn her into this. And I'm sitting next to her. This is another picture that we had to take, getting some of our paperwork in order to try to escape the country. Next slide. And then I want to start wrapping up over here. Okay. My mother and father and my grandparents had this flag. This is what we call the Imperial Flag. Whenever you have, like we do in Los Angeles outside the famous Federal Building in Westwood, in that neighborhood, whenever you have an anti-regime rally, a rally by Iranians against the regime and in support of the Iranian people, they wave this flag. So imagine that. We wave a flag that hasn't been in use since 1979, which is the Imperial Flag, right? The flag that I got in the 1980s was this one. You can go to the next slide. Okay, and you have over here, this flag triggers me. Let's put it that way, that this flag really actually triggers me. I'm actually working really hard to make sure that new generations of young Persian Jews in America know the difference between the flag, because it's volatile and it's a very touchy issue and very, very important. So again, we're Western audiences. We can imagine what it would be like if today in 2022, the country was overturned into theocracy and there were no more stars and stripes, right? And instead it was something else. Maybe it was just a really big cross, which is effectively what happened in Iran. Next slide. Okay. The sort of de facto chief rabbi of Iran, a wonderful man based in Tehran named Rabbi Yedidia Shofet, God rest his soul. Everyone knew him. He married my parents in the mid-1970s. Rabbi Shofet is seen here on the right. this is him walking, being actually forced to walk with everyone else during a parade for Ayatollah Khomeini and the new regime in 1979. Khomeini actually made Rabbi Shofet bow down to him. And when he got up, he actually said, not even the Shah, the king, the monarch had ever asked me or any other representative of our Jewish community to ever bow down to him. He escaped, found his way to Los Angeles, and founded the very famous Nesach synagogue, which is the largest Persian synagogue, I believe, in the country, if not certainly west of the Mississippi. Over 1,000, families. Next slide. Okay. Most Persian Jews who lived in the 70s there, in the late 70s, will tell you that their version of what Americans see as November 22nd, 1963, meaning the day President Kennedy was assassinated. If you ask most Persian Jews of that time, do you remember May 9th, 1979? They'll always answer the same thing. Of course, that was the day Habib al-Ghanian was executed. Habib al-Ghanian was Iran's most prominent and wealthiest Jew. And he literally pulled himself up by his bootstraps. He grew up in those Jewish quarters and ghettos that I told you about, in complete poverty, disease, right? And as a multimillionaire, he obviously became a philanthropist. He gave to a lot of wonderful causes in Israel. This was well documented. This is what cost him his life. Habib al-Ghanian was our combination of imagine a Malcolm Homeline, right? With a Rockefeller or an Andrew Carnegie, only, not a robber baron and not corrupt. He was arrested in 1979, shortly after the regime took over. And then on May 9th, 1979, the unbelievable happens, the impossible happens. Habib al-Ghanian has a sham trial that lasts 20 minutes, accused of, quote unquote, here was the charge, friendship with the enemies of God. The enemies of God were the Zionists. That's very scary terminology, right? Friendship with the enemies of God. He's found guilty and he's executed. I really want you to imagine, and he was a secular Jewish leader. It's sort of like, honestly, it's sort of like if Alan Dershowitz was taken and just sort of, God forbid, executed by the Biden regime. You know what I mean? It's one of the country's most prominent Jews, if not the most prominent one, is just shot to death. He was so powerful, this man, but in a good way, meaning he employed tens of thousands of people, most of them Muslims. He even built a mosque for some of those who were working for him in some of their communities. So if you go onto the next slide, I'll show you the newspaper from that day. If we're really going on a tour of Iran, I want you to see this. So the Etelat newspaper of that day tells you that here's Habib al-Ghanian basically pleading for his life, and he's found on charges of espionage, right? The philanthropist who gave money to Sadaqah in Israel as well as in Iran is tried and charged of spying on behalf of Israel. When I'll tell you that when tens of thousands of Iranian Jews saw this picture in the newspaper, they couldn't believe their eyes. He's frail. He had, by the way, he had been tortured during his time in prison, and so they put makeup on him to cover the marks, right? And I serve as a weekly columnist for the Jewish Journal of Greater Los Angeles. That's where I have my biggest following, thank God. And in May, I dedicated a book review. Habib al-Ghanian's granddaughter, who's based in New York, wrote a wonderful book about her grandfather's life, right to even the days after his death. And she said, and I'm sorry to get graphic with you on this, his body was lying in the morgue that, in that day, May 9th, 1979. And there was a tag around the body. And the tag read, Zionist spy. Next slide. For these, Dani, we'll just go through them. Let me see what they are. Again, you really, when I tell you that the anti-Zionism is a fundamental part of the regime, it's actually on stamps. If you look to the side of the stamp, you'll see, this is an Iranian stamp, that in honor of the martyrdom of Suleiman Khater, hero of Sinai. Well, the hero of Sinai massacred Jews in 1985, right? 4 of them were children, if anybody remembers this. This guy is on an Iranian stamp. Is this something I want to be associated with? No. Next. And so these are the last 2 slides. So after 2,700 years, you have this exodus. You have 100,000 Jews before the revolution. Today, the estimates are about 5,000 to 8,000. If you read numbers that claim up to 25,000, we believe that they're exaggerated because the regime is very clever. The regime always makes a point to say that they are okay with Jews and not okay with Zionists, that the Zionists are the sinners. The Jews are actually the victims of Israel and the Zionists, is what the regime says, right? So the regime has a big stake in actually continuing to say that they have many, many thousands of more Jews within their territory, and that everybody's doing fine and great. And meanwhile, you have things like this, right? You've got little kids here pointing play guns and burning the flag of Israel. So this is the number that we believe is there today. I can answer questions about that later. And this, I believe, is the last slide, and we can go to that, Dani. And this is the all-important question, right? The $64,000 question. Well, I'm speaking to you. Oh, these are those who resettled us in America, of course. Highest, wonderful Jewish Federation, Jewish Family Services, Jewish Vocational Services, right? The stork did not drop us off. We really owe our lives and the lives of our future generations to the wonderful organizations, the Western organizations that helped facilitate our resettlement. So, as I was saying, it's easy for me as a Jew here in Los Angeles, 7,000, whatever it is, 500 miles away, to sit and give you a tour of Persian Iran. But Dani, if you go to the last slide, the real question is, what about the community that I left behind, right? Both of my paternal grandparents, let's skip that one, it's okay, everybody knows about this guy. Both of my paternal grandparents are buried in a Tehran cemetery. I never saw them again after we left Iran. Both of my maternal grandparents are buried in a Jerusalem cemetery. I never did get to see my grandfather after we fled because he passed away shortly after we arrived in America. He was in Israel. I did get to spend a lot of really good time with my maternal grandmother, with Iran. Her name was Iran. Well, guess what? Iran finally made it to Israel, and that's where she lived the remainder of her life, and that's where she's buried. This is a picture that can partly encapsulate Jewish life in Iran today. Okay, so this is a pro-nuclear, yeah, you heard that right, pro-nuclear parade, rally in Iran that took place a few years ago. You could see it says Iranian Jewish something, Islamic of Republic of Iran, right for peace and science and energy. Yes, the uranium is being enriched for peaceful purposes. We all know that. And you see here are the women. Some of the things you see in this picture is you don't see teenagers, right? You don't see some women in their 20s. It's because the younger generations many of them are not there anymore. You do see the mandatory headscarves on all of them, though I can tell you when I was in the 80s, I would have never been able to wear some of the colors and prints that they were wearing. Some of that relaxed a little bit. What you do see, though, behind the Jews that they have paraded who supposedly support the nuclear program is the armed men right behind them, right? You see that? Making sure that everybody's there, everybody's staying, checking in line. These women don't want Iran to have a nuclear weapon. These look like my aunts, right? They want to be able to go home and hurry up and finish up their beaming pot of stew for Shabbat dinner, right? And so this is sort of the picture that I'll end with. We have one parliamentary representative as a minority community. He's a mouthpiece for the regime because he has to be, and he's constantly not criticizing Israel, actually denigrating Israel in the press because he has to be. We have a sort of a chief rabbi. I don't really consider him that, but he's there. He is on like the sort of younger side. I think he's in his 40s, but again, he also has to toe the line when it comes to what he says about Israel, and it's not good. And this is the community that's there today. You see, my family and everything that I was raised with and everything in the core of my DNA is tied in to the newspaper headlines that many other Americans and people around the world read over a cup of coffee or scroll and then move on. When I read a headline and a story about Iran or about Israel or about American foreign policy toward Iran, it's very, very personal. And I'll sort of end with that.
Well, thank you so much, Tabby. This was incredibly, incredibly informative. And thank you everyone for joining today. Danny, did you stop the screen share?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it should be Tabby now.
Thanks so much. And I know we're a little bit over, but I definitely want to.
I'm sorry.
Okay,
that's on me.
A couple of questions. I know some folks had to leave, but there are still a lot of people here. So just a couple. I think you answered a lot of the questions that came up. There's one question about language, about Farsi. Was Farsi the common language used by Jewish communities while living in Iran? And to what extent?
Great question.
And to what extent do Jewish communities still, speak?
Yeah, great question. So everybody did speak it. I call it Persian when I refer to it in English. I don't call it and it's not here or there. I just say I don't call it Farsi because if I call it Farsi when I speak English, it's akin to saying I speak Espanol, right? Whereas we would say I speak, Spanish. So yes, Persian was and is the national language, but incredibly, many of the Jewish communities in Iran, particularly some of the smaller Jewish communities, spoke a dialect of what we call Judeo-Persian. And if you Google Judeo-Persian, and there are actually efforts right now to really try to resuscitate it because very few people speak it anymore. And those that do are a much older population that's unfortunately sort of dying out. If you just Google Judeo-Persian, you can actually YouTube. There are performances in songs of Judeo-Persian, poetry and so on. It's really beautiful.
Thank you. Someone asked about Jewish education in general before the revolution and what that looked like, what the options were.
Sure. So at the time when they were all living in the Jewish quarters at the turn of the century, it was only Jewish education. A wonderful organization called Alliance Française comes from France with the help of French Jewish philanthropists and does something unbelievable. For the first time in Persian Jewish history, they gave us access to secular studies, math, science, medicine, and so on, literature. You did have many Jewish schools before the revolution. I actually went to what before the revolution was really a Jewish school with Jewish educators, Torah being taught, Hebrew and so on. After the education, all of the Jewish administrators were terminated and Muslim administrators came in. And so I was by that point taught in what was supposed to be a Jewish school by women clad in head to toe, not just in the hijab, but actually in the full on, Islamic covering. Magnes is one term that we called it. And so yes, after the revolution, again, there was a fine line. You know what I mean? My husband, who lived even into the 1990s in Iran and Shiraz, was able to take some, classes in Jewish studies, but I mean, God help you if you learned something about Zion in there, right? Or about Jerusalem in there. So again, it was sort of a very, very thin line.
Thank you. A few people asked more about your personal story, how your family was able to leave and come to America, and sort of the timing. Was it considered early or late, and how that happened?
Yeah. So I want to tell you, by the way, that I've completed my memoirs. They're mostly comedic memoirs of what it was like to have grown up from a Jew and a female in post-revolutionary Iran from a Zionist family who literally poses with pictures of Theodore Herzl. And then what it was like to have grown up really just broke, ugly, and hairy as a refugee in Beverly Hills in the 1990s. That's the only way I can say it. So
is that published, Tabby?
No, because I need an agent and a publisher. So if any of you like this, and I'm really putting out the word out there, I need a literary shidduch for myself, right?
Okay, everyone on this Zoom, keep your ears and eyes and all your senses open, and let us know. We would love to make that happen.
Thank you. So the first wave, like I talked about, of Jews leaving Iran happened in the 50s, and that was more out of a Zionist dream. There wasn't so much active persecution, right? The second wave was fearing for their lives, active persecution. When someone like Habib al-Ghani, the head of the community, is, shot in the head, you leave. So from there, you had the 100,000 diminishing by at least over half. My family really surprised everyone. We stayed a long time. The fact that we stayed almost 10 years after the revolution speaks a lot. Yes, we were persecuted as Jews, but the main reason we left is our physical existence was in existential danger, because we lived in a part of Iran that was being pounded daily by Iraqi missiles and bombs during the Iran-Iraq war. So I am a child survivor of the Iran-Iraq war. So is my husband. And that is really what drove us out, was that one night our home was actually our neighborhood was targeted, and we had to make our escape plans. And I thought we were among the last wave, again, until you have those like my husband, who came in the late 1990s. What you don't have anymore is you don't really have Jews leaving Iran. If I today in America find a Jew who left within the last year, this person is a sphinx to me. Mostly due to the stringent immigration laws. Hayas is not able to be helping them, to the best of my knowledge right now. We were resettled out of Italy. We were brought out of Iran and in a clandestine way, and we were resettled in a resettlement town in Italy, along with thousands of Jews from the former USSR, Persian Jews and former Soviet Jews. And we were processed, in that town. It was called La Dispoli, before we made our way all over the world, especially in different parts of America. And then the Italy branch closed. So Hayas couldn't process out of Italy. Then it became, and Austria, Vienna was another big one. My husband came through Vienna by that time in the 90s. Vienna, as far as I know, isn't operational. So right now, Jews that want to leave Iran, I don't think they can. And this is something for us to, research and really look at more in depth. And so, yeah, we did come among the later waves. Nobody can believe that we stayed 10 after these fanatics came to power, but let me tell you why we stayed. When you live in that part of the world, coup d'etats, we had one in 1953, regime change can happen so frequently that even if a bunch of fanatics are brought to power, you inevitably think, how long could this possibly last? If you had told my father in 1978 that the fanatics would be in power now, 43 years later, he would have laughed. He would have laughed in your face. Nobody. The Iranian population is secular, educated, and westernized. Right? The fact, by the way, that they welcomed many of them, Khomeini, millions of them, with open arms and brought in the theocracy is something that you should look up on your own, because it was a reaction really to the corruption and some of the cruel things that the Shah did. But the reason and I'll tell you something, for those who have had the patience to stay on, I'll tell you something amazing. So in June 1989, my family and I are refugees in La Dispoli, a little refugee town right outside of Rome. When on June 3rd, I think, 1989, Ayatollah Khomeini dies. Okay. With Khomeini's death, I want to tell you, never in our lives did we have more hope that Iran could go back to the way it was, right? So we're in transit, literally as refugees, somewhere between America and Iran. My mother starts packing the suitcases back for Iran again and thinks, okay, we can go back now. That's it. I want to go. I miss my family. I miss everything I had ever known. Don't take me to America. I don't even speak English. They'll treat me like a child there, which is exactly what happened. Even though she had freedoms, that's literally exactly what happened. I would have to stand next to her in the supermarket and read her you know, the English words off of the ingredients and a, you know, in a jar of you know, salad dressing. So eventually we decided, oh boy, there are millions and millions of mourners at his funeral, and they just appointed some guy named Khamenei, who's still in power today, you know, in his 80s, to take over for Khomeini as the supreme leader. Yes, supreme leader. That's when my father forced my mother to finally understand that there was no going back to Iran. And so we packed the suitcases, closed them up, and 12 days later, we landed at JFK, the airport. We got a fantastic stamp on our passport that said the greatest words that have ever been written about me. Believe me, a lot of bad things have been written about me too. I'm a public figure and a writer. The greatest words that have ever been written about me were admitted as a refugee pursuant to US code so-and-so. If I could, I would get them tattooed on my head. And so we got to JFK and slept there on top of each other overnight. And the following day, we're resettled in Los Angeles, where we've been ever since.